Hello, I'm Marites Vito. Welcome to Southeast Asia Speaks. This is a show where I get to interview resource persons and news personalities on issues affecting the region. I will be speaking to Charmaine Willoughby, Associate Professor of International Studies at the De La Salle University. We will be talking about how we Filipinos view our region, the ASEAN, and our perceptions of national security priorities, as well as who we think our allies are. And to our viewers and listeners, you can send in your questions at the on the comment section of Facebook, and we'll try to answer them. So thank you so much, Charmaine, for making time for this interview. I know you have a busy class schedule, but we appreciate your presence here.
Thank you so much, Marites, for inviting me. Hello to everybody.
Yes, and this is the time of the year we're closing 2021. Maybe we decided we'd look at ourselves. I mean, this show looks at the region outside the Philippines, but let's look at the Filipinos. And it's quite interesting because when you meet with ASEAN, our neighbors, we seem to be not least, but we're less aware of ASEAN as it exists in the region. That's the feedback I get from the Thais, our friends, the Malaysians, Singaporeans. Is this real? Is this accurate? You've been traveling the region, you've been studying it. Your thoughts, Charmaine?
Unfortunately, this is a very prevalent sentiment all across Southeast Asia, and this is not actually something that's unique to the Philippines. There's also an kind of like a knee-jerk reaction for, say, Singaporeans to go to the U.S. or to Europe to study. Similarly, for Malaysians, they would rather go to Australia. For Indonesians, they would rather go to the Netherlands, for instance. So it's not necessarily unique to the Philippines, this kind of sentiment. But nonetheless, a lot of the crises and issues that we are facing today make us realize that even though, we're not very much aware of our neighbors in Southeast Asia, the problems that we face force us to look towards the region and to underscore the importance of cooperating with the rest of our partners in the region. Also, I should mention that despite this sentiment of Filipinos, we are one of the founding countries of ASEAN. So there's always been this idea that even though a lot of Filipinos would prefer to go to the US or to Japan for tourism, there's always this region to fall back on, and important partners to take care of and to nurture.
It's interesting also that journalists, colleagues I meet in meetings in Southeast Asia, they would say, well, the Philippine mainstream media, they don't have an ASEAN section, unlike like Thailand or Singapore. In the newspapers or maybe online, there's an ASEAN section. But anyway, is this because of our insular thinking? I'm trying to relate it to the fact that we don't have common borders. We don't share borders with any country. So what do you think?
Yeah, certainly our geography does play into this very insular orientation that most Filipinos have. We have this tendency to look beyond our region, and history plays a very important role here. Colonialism, and at the end of the Second World War, we've solidified our alliance with the United States. So I think, based on our geographic environment and our geopolitical dynamics, it makes us a lot more oriented towards our partners outside of the region rather than cooperating, and interacting with the rest of Southeast Asia.
So another observation also, which we encounter when we meet with our Southeast Asian friends, they say, your temperament is more of Latin America. You're colonized by Spain. You don't seem to fit here. I mean, culturally. again, what do you think of this observation, Charmaine?
There is a certain truth to that. We do have a flair for the dramatics as Filipinos. We love our soap opera, and definitely that is the Spanish influence. But that's also a reflection of how diverse Southeast Asia is. It's not that we don't fit in. It's just that there are such a variety of cultures, sentiments, ideas, languages, religions, and all of those things. So I don't think we don't fit in. I think it's just a reflection of how diverse the region truly is.
Okay, now I understand, Charmaine, that you and your academic colleagues, you did a survey, quite a very interesting survey on the perceptions of the Filipino strategic community on the national security priorities and agenda of the Philippines. Maybe you can walk us to this or explain first to us who compose the strategic community, and do these respondents include those from government?
All right. So this was a study that I conducted with fellow academics in 2020. So this was at the height of all the lockdowns and the ramifications of the pandemic. So we conducted this survey. Our respondents were 633 personnel from the Philippine strategic community. These are members of the academe, government agencies outside the security sector, civilian personnel in the security sector, military and uniformed personnel, and members of the private sector. Our main objective here was to test the perceptions on the national security priority areas vis-a-vis the key policy documents that we have, such as the National Security Policy, NSP, National Security Strategy, National Defense Strategy, and the medium-term Philippine Development Plan, plus a Vision 2040. So we wanted to test if these documents really are anchored in the thinking of the Filipino strategic community. So yeah, so that's the background of whom we included in the study.
So maybe the next step is, could you walk us through your key findings, and were there any surprises?
Some surprises. So the overall findings that we highlighted in the study is that the policy documents that we have are indeed very sound. So these are good documents to fall back on. These are good documents to have as a small country, but the devil is in the details. It's in the implementation where challenges and loopholes emerge, and this is also indicative of the Philippines' need to strengthen its domestic structures. We also found out, and this is the second major finding, we also found out that we tend to have this arbitrary prioritization of internal and external security issues, and that largely stems from decision making that is based on instrumentality and patronage politics. So it's not necessarily, we don't necessarily think long term. It's mostly knee-jerk reactions and responses to crises that we face, and that is unfortunate because we do have very very sound policy documents that are supposed to guide us in our national security.
So you're saying, Charmaine, that the, our policymakers don't really follow the blueprint set by these anchor documents?
Well, so there is a blueprint, but we tend to digress oftentimes, and this is largely because of personalities, personal interests, and all that. And one of the important and surprising findings that we found in our study is in terms of the ranking of the preferred partners. So we asked this question because of the official line of the current administration about pivoting to China, pursuing an independent foreign policy. So Originally I thought that, well, if that is what the top level says, then we would expect that the rest of the bureaucracy would also fall in line and follow and subscribe to that idea. But when we asked the Philippine strategic community, who are the respondents to our survey, their preferred partner is actually Japan. So 91.1% of our respondents said that they prefer Japan. The second ranking preferred partner is the United States at 85.2%. And this is still understandable, again, largely because of our alliance with the US. Australia is at number three, and 80.2% of our respondents said that they preferred Australia. So the top three preferred partners are Japan, the US, and Australia. The ASEAN neighbors are somewhere in the middle. So there's Indonesia, Vietnam, Malaysia. Russia, interestingly, is at ninth. With only 37.10% of our respondents saying that they prefer Russia. And China is way down in the list at 27.6%. And to me, this is surprising because this is indicative that even though what the top level says is, pivot to China, not everybody actually subscribes and follows that idea. This is also indicative of the non-automaticity of the balance of power against against China. So this ranking really underscores the need of the Philippines to diversify its international relations, and to me, that is what an independent foreign policy should be all about.
Actually, it's very interesting, the findings of your study. But I remember that the US was always the number one partner. How come Japan outranked it? I mean, is it are there conditions which led to this?
Um, it's understandable that Japan would be the number one preferred partner because of its long history of official development assistance, assistance in terms of infrastructures, and Japan's soft power is really, really top notch. Unfortunately for the United States, I believe the Trump administration kind of changed the way that the region and the Philippines sees the United States. But with the new administration in the U.S., that can likely change. The United States, the fact that the United States is also number two in the preferred partners list is primarily because of there's always been this idea that our relationship or our alliance with the United States is asymmetric, and it's always biased towards what could benefit the United States, and it's always at the expense of the Philippines. So yeah, so there's in other words, there's a lot of political baggage with our relationship and alliance with the United States, which can explain why it's only number two. But Japan has really been the preferred partner because of its soft power, because of its long-standing history in ODA.
Actually, your study gives us journalists and academics and analysts a more nuanced understanding of foreign policy as implemented by the government, because despite the pivot to China, it's fascinating that China is the least preferred partner of the strategic community. So, how then do we analyze foreign policy? Do we say Duterte's statements in contrast to what the Foreign Affairs Secretary says, or this survey shows? I mean, how do we read that?
Yeah, there's always this if anything, this study shows that there's always this disconnect between the top levels and the mid management and the rest of the bureaucracy, and it behooves the country to really strengthen its domestic structures. And as the elections are nearing, we really need, as Filipinos, we really need to ensure that the candidates that we choose prioritize foreign policy so that we don't have these inconsistencies that we have experienced in the last couple of years.
I think we're going to segue to the elections, but can I just read one comment from a viewer? This is from
Sure.
Gabby Domingo. I think this is when we discussed about how come we don't seem to fit into ASEAN, and he said the language is not common. Um, Unlike maybe in Europe where there's more, I don't know, can we compare ASEAN to Europe? Is there a more common history shared by Europe as compared to ASEAN?
Yeah, there are a lot of um, actually in school I don't encourage my students to make a comparative analysis of the EU and ASEAN because the beginnings, the origins of the regional arrangements are so very different. But nonetheless, we do have certain commonalities with our friends, partners, and allies in Europe. And some of those commonalities include our convergence in terms of our commitment to the rule of law, respecting human rights, and all of these things, upholding the rules-based international system. So those are commonalities that we have with our friends in Europe, but also with the rest of Southeast Asia. Language definitely is not common, but again, that speaks to the diversity of Southeast Asia. We can all speak English, and there are some phrases in our local languages that we can trace back to, like, Malay origins or Chinese origins. But again, I don't think that's necessarily a problem. Diversity in Southeast Asia can actually be to our own advantage.
Now we move to the elections, which is really a very interesting topic these days because you mentioned that our candidates should really prioritize foreign relations, even in the discussions when they campaign. But I don't think this is really happening except for one issue, that's the West Philippine Sea. So, how do you see this issue being played up in the election? Or how can, maybe to phrase it differently, how can foreign policy or foreign relations become a popular issue? It's still not there.
Understandably, foreign policy is never or has never been an election issue because Filipinos always feel that. And I mean, not just Filipinos. A lot of people feel that foreign policy is so elitist. It's really just the area of a very select few, and it's so far away from our everyday lives that we don't really care that much about foreign policy. But then when foreign policy is translated as a gut issue or a kitchen table issue, when it is rephrased or reframed as food security or human security, when it is translated and reframed as access for our fisher folks to fish in our own waters, then all of a sudden we start caring about these issues. So I think that's one way in which we could, quote unquote, popularize foreign policy. When Filipinos feel that and realize that foreign policy is actually just an extension of domestic policy, and domestic concerns, then it can become an election issue.
Final question, Charmaine, maybe advice to the media because we have a responsibility to cover these issues. And you said you made a good point about if we frame it, we talk about food security, and when and make it a kitchen table issue, then it resonates with the public. So there should be a simplification. I mean, the journalists should be able to simplify the issues, and we also get uh, inspiration from the academics because we interview you. So maybe you should help us simplify the issues. How do you do it with your students?
Well, there's it's always our job, whether as academics or as journalists, to be responsible knowledge producers. And sometimes knowledge or policies or ideas and concepts can feel so very distant from our everyday realities. But it's really incumbent upon us academics, practitioners, journalists, to find a connection in how it can resonate with ordinary Filipinos or the younger generation. Sometimes it may mean that we just need to simplify matters, use social media a lot, use the language that they speak, but also it requires that we never give up on popularizing these issues and putting these issues on the spotlight. And I think that's also one way of ensuring that disinformation, misinformation, and a lot of these fake news will not proliferate.
On that note, thank you so much, Charmaine. We have my big takeaway is really to keep um, trying to make our readers, our viewers, our listeners more aware of issues such as this. That's why we have this show, Southeast Asia Speaks, if I may advertise. And we hope to talk to you again, Charmaine. It's been very fascinating talking to you and to our viewers and to our listeners. Let's continue to watch what's happening outside our country, and because eventually this will impact on the region as well. So thank you and bye. Thank you, Charmaine.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.